Here we are again, talking about trans issues. This is the Trans Day of Remembrance. It's the day when people around the world tally up the number of people who have been killed in the last year for being trans. And it only counts those people who are killed. They calculate this year 350 people, trans people, have been killed. And when you look at the descriptions tend to be shot in the head, stabbed, burned to death, beaten, stoned. I remember being slightly shocked at seeing one dismembered. That was a trans woman in India. Now, it is pretty despicable that this sort of thing goes on. If people were wondering why Trish and I were focusing on trans issues on Faint Signals from Vega, it's basically because of the run-up to the Trans Day of Remembrance. It's also because of Glenn Greenwald's well-timed article on free speech, in which he focuses primarily on the horrible danger of left-wing cancel culture impacting transphobes. As can be seen on the video on Trish's channel, he focuses on Schreer's book, which is basically a pack of lies, and some of the responses to that, because it was an incredibly transphobic book. Their own initial publisher refused to publish it. She found another publisher. It was being sold on Amazon. Her publisher wanted to take out full advertising on Amazon, and Amazon said no. And so, shock horror, canceling. We can't allow any impediment to the promotion of these views. And that's really what it's about, because Amazon didn't prohibit the sale of the book. It's there for sale on Amazon. She was interviewed by Joe Rogan and a whole range of people. She got plenty of media. The fact that Amazon said no to the ads gave her even more media. And this is a bit of a pattern. It's a pattern that we've seen with J.K. Rowling and her canceling letter, where J.K. Rowling has gotten so much publicity for her transphobic views, I don't think anyone is unaware of them. Anyway, Glenn Greenwald objected to left-wing people effectively criticizing these people. He talks about free speech, but in no way has their free speech been impacted. The right to advertise isn't guaranteed in free speech. Free speech, I mean, she wrote a book, it was for sale, she was on news programs and interview programs. She can't be said not to have her views heard. Anyway, Glenn Greenwald seemed to think this is the big threat to free speech, in spite of the fact that Israel has managed to get, I think it's 38 states in the United States, to pass laws saying any support for BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, would be grounds. They were putting out contracts that said, if you want to work in the state of Georgia or several other states, you must sign basically a loyalty oath to Israel. And this is in the United States, that you would not support boycotts and so on. And Netanyahu was very congratulatory. It managed to derail a talk by Abby Martin. She's taking that to court. I do recommend you have a look at that on the Empire Files. There's a link. The interesting thing is that Greenwald's sole examples of impediments to free speech were the impediments of transphobes to speak. He used as an example one of the people who write for Vox, who wrote a public letter saying that one of the other major writers, putting out and supporting J.K. Rowling's missive, and basically didn't feel safe for herself. In that letter, she said that she didn't want him censored or canceled or fired or even reprimanded. She didn't want an apology. She just wanted people to understand that that this kind of transphobia makes trans people less safe. Greenwald saw that letter as being, a big impediment to free speech, which is kind of surprising, seeing as Greenwald comes from Brazil. Now, this year, they feel that they've counted, I think, 350 trans people who've been killed as murdered because they were trans. I will explain just a little bit that TDOR doesn't count the murder of every trans person. It counts the murder of every trans person who can be shown to have been murdered because they are trans. It doesn't count the murder of people by their boyfriends that can, or through theft or standover, or in a number of other contexts. In spite of the fact that you have to wonder how many domestic disputes that end up in the murder of a trans person are murders that wouldn't have happened if those partners hadn't been trans. I remember looking at a particular example a couple of years ago on a TDOR. I was wondering, we don't seem to have many trans people killed in Australia. Well, yes, and I was looking through the news, and there was a very prominent report of a trans woman who had been killed. She was discovered when the police raided the apartment of her boyfriend, she and her boyfriend, because of the smell, and found her foot in a pot cooking on the stove. Now, this was not included in Trans Day of Remembrance as a trans-related killing. It was not included because she was killed by her boyfriend, and so it was seen as a domestic dispute. I wonder how many domestic disputes with cis women end up with the woman cooking in a pot in the apartment. Kat Black has talked about the fact that within the Black community, one of the really unfortunate things that she's noticed is that a lot of Black trans women who get together with Black men, their relationship goes on relatively happily until other people note that she is trans, have a go at her boyfriend, and then he beats her up or potentially kills her because he wants to show that he's not one of those people who sleeps with trans women. All of these things do not get included in the Trans Day of Remembrance. They're not part of that 350 people killed this year. Beaten, burned to death, beaten to death, dismembered, strangled, shot, and so on. The descriptions of how people die are quite horrible. Now, I was a bit shocked, since Glenn Greenwald is gay and lives in Brazil. I was pretty sure he was aware of how many people in Brazil. Brazil is the country with the largest number of trans murders in the world. Something like 43% of all of those 350 people who are killed, 43% of them happened in Brazil. 98% of them happened to trans women. 63% of them happened to people who were also doing sex work. Now, Trans Day of Remembrance numbers don't count people who are seen as being murdered because they're sex workers or in the process of robbing a sex worker. They're pretty good at distinguishing these things, but 63% of the trans women who were killed were sex workers, and they were killed because they were trans. Europe had 10 people who were killed in the last year for being trans. 50% of those were migrants. In the US, I think the more official counts that I look at say 28 people, trans women, were killed in 2020, and the majority of those were people of color, most of them Black. It is disgraceful that these people are killed, and death is the tip of the iceberg. To have that many people killed, imagine for a moment how many people would have been assaulted physically or sexually or both. Imagine how many people, beyond that, would have been insulted and abused and so on. And the abuse is actually pretty horrible. This year the number is 350. We did a couple of trans videos, videos on trans issues a couple of days ago. This is mostly why. Okay, well, Trans Day of Remembrance is not a happy day. It's a day to consider what we do to other human beings. Trans people don't represent a threat to anyone, except in the sense that they may undermine gender norms. But what threat exactly is that? I was watching The Tightrope, which is a podcast that regularly has Cornel West, and it had Peppermint for the Trans Day of Remembrance. Peppermint, who is a trans drag queen, the one who was disputed whether or not she could be on RuPaul's Drag Race. And on the Tightrope, one of the things that came up was the fact that this assertion in the last few years, this heavy anti-trans, transphobic narrative that has focused on whether a trans woman really can be considered a woman or a trans man really can be considered a man, the kind of thing that's spearheaded by J.K. Rowling and her associates, that this actually represents a threat and seems to come hand in glove with attacks on women's rights, because emphasizing the biological narrative, the idea that biology is destiny and biology can't be changed and biological realities are what they are, is also used to, for example, limit reproductive freedom, because biologically women are meant to have children. And I thought that was a good point. And people need to be aware. I think it was Dr. West who actually made the point that there's a lot of people, or perhaps it was Peppermint, made the point that a lot of women, whether they are trans or cis, are coming under attack because of the same kind of basic argument used to diss trans women, coming under attack because they are in some way non-normative in their gender expression, that it is an assault on that freedom to express your gender however you like, to express your gender freely. That's all I have to say. I just wanted to say a quick something about Trans Day of Remembrance. Definitely have a look at Faint Signals from Vega. Excellent channel. I'm often there as a moderator. I also recommend The Tightrope. It's a very good channel. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks. Bye.